Okay, let's get started. This morning, I'm going to call this the signs of the end. And I want to thank all of my smart aleck friends this morning who pointed out that it must be the end because I have a tie on. So don't get used to it. I actually had to wear a tie this week at work. I went to a law firm in another town where they really look down on you if you don't have a suit and tie on. So, and I'm pretty sure that includes a non-white shirt. They're a little on the conservative side. Good people, but a little conservative. We're going to talk this week about the convergence of these signs that I think indicate that we live in the end times. You're not going to even get a fourth of what I could share with you this week. I know people hate it when I say that, but as I sifted through things, it was very difficult to decide what to include and what not to include. So I'm not going to even talk about the economy and the fact that they're loaning too much money to people who can't afford to pay it back, which is exactly what they did back in 2000, up to 2008, which caused the last economic collapse, and our politicians are pushing for it again. I'm not even going to talk about that. I want to open, though, with this passage in Daniel chapter 12, a few verses. Daniel chapter 12, verses 4, 9, and 10. It says this, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Now, a lot of people think that means that in the end times, and I think it is a reasonable interpretation of it, of the prophecy, that people will be very busy. I mean, look at how busy our lives are. Pastor Steve talked a little bit about that in first hour. Everybody's running around. Kids are getting what they call tech-snick because they're always looking into their phone. Taking selfies all the time is very stressful. You know, you have to look good. But people will run around and be busy. And knowledge, some people say that that's technology and the increase of knowledge. And I've done some presentations on that in connection with my law practice, where the amount of information that was created in all of history is now repeated about every 10 to 15 days in terms of information, the volume of information. And it's amazing when that happens that people are dumber than ever, especially some of our politicians, because they think they can do what people have done in the past and they're going to get a different result. That's the definition of insanity. But it also says this, and he said in verse 9, and he said, but I think, just to back up, that passage also means that in the end times, people are going to have a better understanding of Scripture. And I get that from the follow-up passages in verses 9 and 10. And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." Verse 10, "Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand." But then he concludes with this, "But the wise shall understand." So I do think that one of the indicators of the end times, and one of the things that will happen, is that the faithful remnant will have not new revelation about Scripture, but they will have an increased understanding of what the Scripture says, mainly because the things that are going on correspond to what the prophets and Jesus said the times of the end would be like. And so that kind of knowledge, the Scriptures properly interpreted, looking at the light of things that are coming to pass on the earth, will increase, and the wise will understand. So if you're in a church where they don't even want to talk about Bible prophecy, and I know we talk about it a lot here, some say we talk about it too much, but that's one of the things that we think we should talk about here. But if you're in a church where they don't even talk about it, they don't want to understand what the Scriptures say. I think it's as simple as that. So let's look at some of the things that are going on. Now, this is kind of a follow-up to a little bit last year. This is a Justice Department press release. There was an event that took place at George Washington University, sponsored by George Washington University's Department of National Security and Domestic Terrorism, along with a group called the Southern Poverty Leadership Center, Southern Poverty Law Center. And this man, John Carlin, is an assistant attorney general for the United States, and he made some remarks on domestic terrorism. Well, I want you to listen to his remarks, and so I have a few minute clip. Listen to what he says about this new department that they've created within Homeland Security. And remember, last week we talked about the Strong Cities Initiative that the Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced at the UN just a couple of weeks ago about where they're going to look for extremism. But all the examples pretty much on their websites are right-wing extremism. But listen first to what Mr. Carlin had to say.
So that is a threat, demands our attention, and demands much discussion.
Now, what he's talking about first, he's been talking about international terrorism. Now he's going to turn to domestic terrorism.
But because of that, in part, there's less time spent focusing on those groups who are not motivated by an ideology that emanates from overseas, but one that's here at home. So while we address that evolving international threat of violent extremism, we have not and cannot lose sight of the domestic terrorism threat posed by other violent extremists. Terror and extremism do not always originate elsewhere or take place outside our borders. Homegrown violent extremists instead can be motivated by any viewpoint on a full spectrum of hate. Anti-government views, racism, bigotry, anarchy, and other despicable beliefs. When it comes to hate and intolerance, there's no single ideology that governs. Now in America, harboring extremist views is not itself a crime, nor should it be. And it is not the expression of a hateful ideology or association with a particular hateful group. What we do focus on is that line between speech and violence, and it's crossed too often, and it results in heartbreaking tragedies. We've created a new position to assist in our important work in combating domestic terrorism. So just this week, I appointed a new Domestic Terrorism Council to serve as our main point of contact for our U.S. attorneys working on domestic terrorism matters. And programs like GW and Southern Poverty Law Center, I think, will be particularly important on this front. To counter violent extremism, we must begin by doing more to empower those who are best placed to effect change, be they parents, teachers, coaches, mental health professionals, or others who know their communities best. And to that end, the Attorney General, when she was out attending the United Nations General Assembly events, hosted her own launch of a Strong Cities Network. And that's the first ever network of city leaders around the world involved in building community resilience.
So remember that we talked about this pretty extensively last week, the Strong Cities Network. So I think it's important, because I do think that what we see going on with the Jews in Israel is also going to be visited upon the church. And I do think there is a time of testing, trial, persecution coming on the church. I think we need to be prepared for it. We need to be prepared mentally, spiritually, to stand against it. It's coming. You see them rolling it out bit by bit. A couple of weeks ago at the UN, Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, rolled out the Strong Cities Network, the first ever, inspiring local resilience on a global scale. We went through the websites that of all the integrated groups that are doing this, and they're focusing on a lot on what they call right-wing extremism. And you see now this Attorney General, they've created a new Assistant Attorney General or a council position to deal particularly with this issue. Now look, we know that there are skinheads, there are neo-Nazis, there are Nazis, there's even the Klan, there's black separatist groups that are violent and extreme, and I'm not opposed to watching for those groups who will delve into violence. But that is never where the government stops, and is not where the government is going to stop this time. For example, one of the things, this is what was said with the Strong Cities, to counter violent extremism, this is the terminology that our administration uses, we need determined action at all levels of governance. To succeed, we must coordinate our efforts and cooperate across borders. The Strong Cities Network will enable cities across the globe to pool our resources, knowledge, and best practices together, and thus leave us standing stronger in the fight against one of the greatest threats to modern society. In connection with this event at George Washington University earlier this week, the press release from the Department of Justice from Mr. Carlin said this: "It is an honor to be at this event, co-hosted by the George Washington University's new program on extremism and the Southern Poverty Law Center. The partnership between SPLC and George Washington University serves as a reminder that violent extremism is neither a new phenomenon nor one that is limited to any single population, region, or ideology." It also says this in the press release: "Since its creation in 1971, SPLC has been an important voice on the wide range of extremist groups throughout this country." Now let me just say this: the Southern Poverty Leadership Center is itself an extremist group by its own definition, by its words, and by the way it attacks good people, common people, Christians that they consider to be on the right, extremist right in the country. And I will show you an example of what happens when people like the Southern Poverty Law Center run unchecked. The SPLC does the noble work of examining what the threat is, observing it, and reporting on it. And then in an article discussing this, the SPLC says it places groups, including conservative Christian groups, on its hate list based on their beliefs, not their propensity for violence. But this is the group that our government is going to get information about who to watch for. I don't think you're going to believe what you're going to see here. Heidi Byrick, the SPLC, she was at the conference. The SPLC's intelligence project director teamed with Carlin to demonize pro-family groups. She told a reporter that the Southern Poverty Law Center classifies groups as hate groups on the basis of ideology. In other words, the Southern Poverty Law Center will vilify groups because of what they believe, not because of what they do or because they have demonstrated any propensity toward violence. And she flatly admits it. "We post groups on the basis of ideology, not whether they're violent or not." That's what she says. The government now relies on that misinformation. Example: one of the groups that was put on the list, the hate list, was the Family Research Council, headed up by Tony Perkins in D.C. And do you remember a couple of years ago when this man went in there with the names of the people and board members of the Family Research Council written on the wrappers of Chick-fil-A sandwiches? He went in there to kill them. And it was only because of a courageous guard that a slaughter did not take place. The guard was shot, but he was able to wrestle the gun away from this man. He's pled guilty. He's in prison. He got his information about who to target from where? The Southern Poverty Law Center. And now our government, as official policy, is relying on their determination of who is or who is not a hate group. In his plea agreement, Corkins, the man who did this at the Family Research Council, acknowledged he identified the Family Research Council as an anti-gay organization by visiting Southern Poverty's website. The head of the council, Tony Perkins, called on the group to stop labeling his organization and others hate groups because of their stance on gay issues. A spokesman for the Alabama-based law center did not immediately return a telephone message, and they will never call you back. If you call them and challenge them, you'll get on the list. This is their website. They have a hate map. There are currently 784 hate groups operating in the United States. So I went to Central Ohio. Here are two. Past the Salt Ministries, Dave Daubenmeier. A lot of you know Dave. He's a fine man. He's very passionate about the Lord and reaching the lost. He is a hate group. A hate group because he is anti-LGBT. And the other one on here is Mission America. I believe that's Linda Harvey's organization. You hear her on the radio. She is a hate group. That lady is not a hater. She is concerned for the salvation of people that are lost and need Jesus Christ. But in our government's mind, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, she's a hate group, her organization. You ought to be troubled by that. So I'm only telling you this because you've watched the progressive rolling out of this over the last couple of weeks. And I don't want to be an alarmist. I'm a realist. I'm troubled by this. I am alarmed by this. I am concerned about this. So, what do? Steel your minds, steel your hearts, and keep speaking out. And that's what we intend to do here. Because there are things going on in our world, our culture, our government that need to be pointed out because of the really prophetic significance of the times in which we live. And if that gets me labeled as a hater, so be it. I'm concerned about what's going to happen to these people because their hatred of Christianity is so severe that anybody who stands up for traditional values gets labeled as a hate group. Anybody who speaks the truth on issues gets labeled as a hate group. Well, let's turn mostly to the Middle East, Europe, and some of the things going on there. This exodus of people from Syria and other parts of the Middle East continues. Time had a cover last week called The Exodus. What's going on? The European leaders don't know what to do. There's some talk about even Croatia is looking at closing its border with Hungary. It has closed its border with Hungary because Croatia doesn't want any more of these people coming through their country. They're causing problems. There's riots taking place in various cities across Europe because of the people that are coming in. Times article, of course, called it the Great Migration. So this is a problem. This is what we've talked about, that in the past, invading armies usually provided their own transportation. Now everybody seems to be bringing them to the front lines to do what they're going to do, and they want to bring them to the United States. In fact, I don't know if I played a clip last week of one of the people in charge of this that says, well, we really don't have a way to vet the people that are coming in testimony before Congress. We just kind of have to take their word for it that they're okay and there's nothing wrong with them. That's comforting. In fact, there's the picture of one of the, in one of the articles, this is in the Jerusalem Post the other day or this morning, the refugees at our door. That's people on top of trains coming across to the Mexico border here from Central America. And a lot of them have come through. Well, let's turn now to the Middle East, and we'll focus on that for the rest of the time this morning. One of the problems, and I've said this in the past, is that the Persians invented chess, the Russians mastered it, and while they're playing chess, we're playing checkers. And we're down to one piece, it looks like, on the board there, and Putin and those guys. And I look, people send me things about Putin and how he's protecting Christians, and this is great. You need to understand the Russians are masters at deception. And on the surface, it may look like they're doing good, and they're doing this, and they're the champion of the Christians. But there is a religious component to what Putin does in the Russian Orthodox Church, which has always been extremely anti-Semitic in its orientation. And things that Putin has done in the past. I reported to you back in, I think it was 2 years, about a year and a half ago. There was an article in the Investors Business Daily, an editorial that said that Putin had taken an icon from the Kremlin and flown it around Crimea in a plane. And this is an icon, when you study the history of it, you find out that the Russians have used this icon, at least the current version is a copy of the original, because the original was lost or burned, stolen, lost, or burned. This copy is the most venerated icon in the Russian Orthodox Church. It's in a church in the Kremlin, and Putin took it and flew it around Crimea before they invaded Crimea. So if you hear stories of a single solitary Russian plane flying around someplace, I suspect that icon is being flown around. It was used, the original icon was used, for example, to lead the Russian troops into battle at the Battle of Waterloo, where they defeated Napoleon. So it's an interesting thing that's going on. You need to be aware of that component. And you can look back on our update from a while ago, it might be a couple years now, where we talked about that icon and how it ended up somehow in Fatima, under the control of one of the Fatima organizations, where there's that big Russian sort of a replica of the Vatican Square and the vision that came to the shepherd children back in around the time of the First World War. And that icon eventually was given to Pope John Paul II, who kept it on his altar in his private prayer chapel at the Vatican. And there's pictures of him and Putin sitting there at a meeting in the Vatican, and right in the middle of them is this icon of this Black Madonna. And then it was later presented by a Vatican representative. Pope John Paul wanted to do it himself, but his health didn't permit it. It was given back to Russia. And now Putin's using it. So I'm just saying is, you need to understand that there's a lot going on here. For example, we see this thing, we have this agreement with Iran, supposedly not to have ballistic missiles, and now they have conducted long-range missile tests. And the word from our government is, it was capable of carrying a nuclear weapon. On Iranian TV, they had pictures of underground caves and bunkers where these long-range missiles are stored. And we're going to start giving them billions of dollars, so I guess they could do something. Even The Economist picked up on this with Putin and China and Obama playing poker. The whole thing in the Middle East is very complicated. There are multiple overlapping interests. Maybe you can get this presentation and pause the presentation here to go into it about whose interest collides with who's joined together, where are they common, what are their goals. This was from the Wall Street Journal the other day. It's actually a very good analysis of what's going on. It was in I think it was in Friday's edition of the Wall Street Journal. It's a very complicated situation, and Russia can give the appearance that they're coming in there to do good, that they're going to protect the Christians. And you'll believe them. It's very easy to believe them. But know that the Russians are the masters of deception. And people say, well, they fooled Obama. So let me just make one suggestion. How do you know Obama's not working with them? Right? How do you know? I mean, at times he appears to be a Russian plant. And I can't discount that possibility. I know that I've heard people from Russia say this, we've known about that guy for a long time. You think he came out of nowhere, but he didn't to us. So here we see the Russian airstrikes over the last couple of weeks. They are not attacking, at least very much, the ISIS positions yet. They're mainly focusing on the rebel-held areas in Syria because they want to prop up the Syrian regime, which is the reddish area. The gray area is ISIS, and the rebel area is the yellow area. So they're trying to take back the area held by the rebels. It's all very complicated, and of course this all borders right on Syria. Who knows what's going to be. This was in the, last year this was in the, one of the Israeli newspapers. It said this, FYI, Putin equals Gog, Crimea equals Magog, the apocalypse is here and the Messiah is coming. That was in an Israeli newspaper last year. So they recognize it. They cited a lot of Christian groups and that type of thing. There's an article in the, this is from 8 years ago, in the Wall Street Journal, Tears KGB Roots, talking about what Russia did. The guy writes and he says, my friend died a year ago today in a hospital in England. He was poisoned by the Russians. Remember what happened to the guy in England? He was an agent and he was poisoned, he died, and this guy writes and he says, This type of assassination, he says, this is nothing new for Russia. The KGB has long used terrorist tactics and worked closely with organizations like Yasser Arafat's PLO. What? The year before, in July 2005, Sasha, that's his friend, wrote a confidential report prepared for a special commission of the Italian parliament investigating KGB activities in Italy that, quote, until recently the KGB had been in charge of all international terrorism. The manner of his death suggests that Russia today, under the leadership of former KGB Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Putin, is up to its old tricks. A KGB officer, Vasil Fyodorovich Samolenko, you don't know how to pronounce it either, cultivated Arafat for a long time. A 1974 photograph shows them together at a wreath-laying ceremony in Moscow. During this visit, the Soviets called the PLO the sole legitimate representative of the Arab people of Palestine, a controversial stance for that era that sealed their close alliance. And there's a picture of Arafat laying a wreath with this Russian agent, and of course there's Arafat with Putin down there. Well, here's a question that was on one of the, I think it was in the Jerusalem Post. Has a third Intifada begun? There were two Intifadas previously. There was one that started in 1987. There was one that started in 2000. They were waves of terror and attacks by Palestinian Arabs in Israel proper, what we call Israel proper today. You might remember things such as the bombing of the Sbarro Pizza Parlor in Jerusalem, where a number of people were killed, bus bombings, suicide bombings, everywhere. The people that did those bombings, especially in the 2000 wave, they have squares and streets named after them in the territories under the control of the Palestinian Authority. They're celebrated, they're lauded, they're praised. A lot of people, they don't know in Jerusalem, words I have is that it's very bad. In Jerusalem right now, people are very fearful because they just don't know if they can walk down the street and trust anyone. And there's been a wave of terror attacks this week. The New York Times this morning said East Jerusalem bubbling over with despair, the frustration behind a series of shootings. I'm going to play you a number of clips of people that are sort of trying to explain what's happening. What you see what's happening, though, is the whole framework of the society over there seems to be crumbling. This is from the Jewish Chronicle in England. You see protests taking place on both sides of the ledger, both on the Israeli side and on the Arab side. A number of Palestinians have been killed. Here's the article today, conflicting accounts of Jerusalem strife surround wounded boy. This is from the New York Times the other day. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Here's the Jerusalem Post from, I think, this morning. Rash of Palestinian stabbing attempts continues over the weekend. Danny Danon says Israel will not agree to an international presence on the Temple Mount because what's happened is France has indicated that they're going to put forth a proposal at the United Nations as soon as they can before the Security Council that says that international observers and international force should be put in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. Now, Israel has come out and forcefully said they will not allow that, but you need to understand that depending on how that vote goes, all of the international pressure is on Israel to cave in, to create a two-state solution. I'm going to talk about, and as I finish today, the biblical basis of what I think is actually prophesied in Scripture that is playing out on the front pages and news reports from around the world right now. A BBC reporter asked Prime Minister Netanyahu a question about this, and here is the response. This is just audio. Here's what Prime Minister Netanyahu said.
Mr. Prime Minister, Lisa said to the BBC, you said you're open to international intervention. We understand Secretary of State John Kerry will come here. He's likely to say that, Mr. Prime Minister, at some point you should go back to the negotiating table. What will you say to him? And if you don't believe negotiations are the way forward, what is the way out?
He's going to call on me for resuming negotiations? I've
He'll
been
urge
calling. Are we living on the same planet, Liz? I've been calling day in, day out, in every forum, in the United Nations, in the U.S. Congress, in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv. I haven't done so in Nepal because I haven't visited it. I've called on President Abbas to resume unconditional negotiations immediately. Right now, as we speak, we can meet. I have no problem with that. I think we should stop immediately this wave of incitement against Israel and these attacks, murderous attacks against Jews. The point of my statement is simple. I'm willing to meet him. He's not willing to meet me. And you ask me about the resumption of negotiations? Come on, get with the program. These people don't want negotiations and they're inciting for violence. Direct your questions to them.
Good for him. Now, this has a history. I want you to watch the progression of our government and our response to this situation over the last 4 years. May 19th, 2011, Barack Obama gave a speech on the Middle East, introduced by the then Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and this is just a short clip of what he had to say.
So while the core issues of the conflict must be negotiated, the basis of those negotiations is clear: a viable Palestine, a secure Israel. The United States believes that negotiations should result in two states with permanent Palestinian borders with Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, and permanent Israeli borders with Palestine. We believe the borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps, so that secure and recognized borders are established for both states.
This is, I think, a perfect example of the thing I talk a lot about, the end times. Jesus talked about the thing that the predominant characteristic of things we need to be aware of was deception. Deception in the church. And when we study the prophetic scriptures, we find out that this deception operates on many, many levels. There's a deception in morality and culture. There's a deception in the church on various issues. There's a deception in geopolitics. Because eventually the world will accept as a leader a man who's possessed by Satan. May I suggest to you, it's not hard to believe that that would happen? You get my point? Here's John Kerry the other day at Harvard talking about the situation in the Middle East. Listen carefully to what he says. He talks a little bit about the settlements. Jews actually building in Israel, their homeland. Actually, there's not that many that have settled. There's been less in the Netanyahu years that have moved into those areas. They're just having lots of babies. That's why their numbers are increasing.
It's a pretty simple equation, folks. If you don't want to lose them or even sort of hand them over to the folks who will fill the vacuum, who have a mission that is so distorted and dangerous, but who won't hesitate to strap a suicide vest around one of those kids that they can steal from that potential, for that possible future, and send them into a mosque or send them into a meeting or send them into a peace rally in Turkey the other day and blow the place up. You know, this is the challenge. I think it's the challenge of violent extremist, religious, radical extremism is the challenge of our generation, of all of us together. So here's the deal. What's happening is that unless we get going, a two-state solution could conceivably be stolen from everybody. And there's been a massive increase in settlements over the course of the last years. Now you have this violence because there's a frustration that is growing, and a frustration among Israelis who don't see any movement. So I look at that and I say, if that did explode, and I pray and hope it won't, and I think there are options to prevent that, but we would inevitably be, at some point, we're going to have to be engaged in working through those kinds of difficulties. So better to try to find the ways to deal with it before that happens than later. And I think, what always perplexes me is, we've been through Oslo, Y Plantation, Madrid, countless negotiations. Most people I talk to have a pretty damn good sense of exactly what has to be done, where it goes. It's a question of making the judgments and having courage to go there.
Since he was at a university, maybe I can comment on that. Did he go to Harvard? I don't remember if he went to Harvard. If being wrong was a class, he would be at the head of that class. He's been wrong on every major geopolitical issue that I can think of in my lifetime. I may have missed one that he actually got right, but I'm grading on the curve, so I'm giving him an A+ in being wrong. Because the world is upside down, and that's how you have to grade these guys these days.
I think he's been very clear that
Okay, now I'm going to move to the State Department press briefing the next day, because what Kerry said about the settlements got a lot of pushback from the Israeli government, that this was the cause of the frustration. It's simply not true. I mean, this thing has been going on since the Jews moved back into their homeland in large numbers back in the early part of the 20th century. So the question was, what do you think of what Kerry said about the settlements and the pushback? And here's the responses to these questions and some additional questions of the Secretary of State press spokesperson. I think his name is Ron Kirby. The redhead gal, Jen, I think she's in therapy now because she did it for so long, and she had to take these ridiculous positions. She's over at the White House, actually, helping out the communications there. So here's the press briefing the next day at the State Department.
I think he's been very clear that he wants both sides to take the affirmative actions, both in rhetoric and in action, to de-escalate the tension, to restore calm, and to try to move forward towards a two-state solution.
Mahmoud Abbas just made a short speech a little while ago. He's basically accusing Israel of conducting summary executions and so on.
He's talking about Mahmoud Abbas said Israel's conducting executions on the street.
He's threatening to take it to the International Court, International Criminal Court. Do you agree that the Palestinians must have some sort of a method or a course and so on by which they oppose this occupation that has gone on for so long?
Well, again, without getting into specific terminology here, say what we would like to see is progress made on both sides in both rhetoric and in action towards a meaningful two-state solution. Yes.
You've called this wave terrorism. You now have 28 attacks over 14 days, 7 dead, over 70 wounded. Just a couple hours ago, you had Ambassador Saperstein come here, and he said to hold Israel to different standards than any other country isn't just inappropriate, it's anti-Semitism. What would you have in terms of these checkpoints? What would you have Israel do? And I'll follow up on that because the exact quote from yesterday wasn't actually read. Kerry said, and there's been a massive increase in settlements over the course of the last years, and now you have this violence because there's a frustration that is growing. Is the suggestion that what Israel should do is stop settlements? And if that's the suggestion, are you not also suggesting that the terrorism that is happening at the current moment, as you describe it, has legitimate political motivations?
Remember one of the movies talking about a criminal trial, that the guy, I always know that I've got him when he kind of does this, so watch his response.
On settlements, our policy has not changed. We continue to believe to continue to take the position that they're legitimate. So there's been no change on our policy on settlements. And hang on, just let me finish. You asked a whopper of a question, so you got to give me a chance to answer here. So no change in our position on settlements. And obviously, we don't want to see that practice continue. Okay, that's crystal clear. And you're right the way you read the quote back. And I'm actually glad you did, because it just reinforces my point earlier. The secretary wasn't saying, well, now you have, the settlement activity is the cause for the effect we're seeing. Is it a source of frustration for Palestinians? You bet it is. And the secretary observed that. But this isn't about affixing, as I said, blame on either side here for the violence. What we want to see is the violence cease, and we want to see it end. And so to your other question, well, what do we want to see the Israelis do? And I think you mentioned checkpoints. It's not our, we're not going to dictate immediate, security requirements onto Israel. Again, the Israeli government has a right and a responsibility to protect its citizens. Now, we have seen some, I wouldn't call the checkpoints this, we've certainly seen some reports of what many would consider excessive use of force. Obviously, we don't like to see that, and we want to see restrictions that are elevated in this time of violence to be as temporary as possible, if they have to be enacted.
Okay, now we're going to move to John Kerry responding to the response to what he said. He's at Indiana University speaking on the 15th.
We are living in extraordinarily complicated times. I am, as many of us on the podium here, I suspect, are children of the Cold War, but also children of the victory of that Cold War and of an enormous transition. And we are witnessing forces that for years were tamped down by dictators and by the Cold War itself. And all of those forces have now been released into a clash with modernity. Also, tinges of failed governance.
If you call that, what Kerry said, a clash of civilizations, he would object and push back because it doesn't fit his ideology. He can't bring himself to tell the truth of exactly what it is that's going on, and that this is prophesied in Scripture. We'll see that in just a moment. Here's Samantha Power at the UN. The Security Council convened to discuss this, and I'll play just a part of her comments.
The United States shares the deep concern of everyone here today about the current situation and condemns in the strongest terms the ongoing violence in Jerusalem, the West Bank, Israel, and the Gaza Strip.
Now, why doesn't she just call it what it is? You see what she's doing? She's equivocating, making each side equivalent, because she can't tell right from wrong.
The human consequences of the violence have been grave and continue to mount. Since October 1st, Israelis have faced 38 attacks in which at least 7 Israelis have been killed and more than 40 injured, some gravely. During the same period, 18 Palestinians have been killed and hundreds injured in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza by live fire or rubber bullets from Israeli security forces in the course of demonstrations or clashes. We mourn the loss of all life, Israeli and Palestinian, and continue to stress the importance of both parties condemning the violence and avoiding provocative statements that can further inflame tensions. In the face of this violence, we remain committed.
Well, they remain committed to doing the same thing, equivocating on critical issues. Here is the new Israeli ambassador to the UN responding to what the Security Council was doing. Danny Danon.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wish that my first time speaking to you was on happier terms, yet the tide of terror washing my country has compelled me to speak to you today, this morning. Today, the Security Council convened another meeting to discuss the growing tensions in my country, titled as the situation in the Middle East. However, this is not what we need. What we do need is this Council to convene a meeting on the dangerous incitement led by President Abbas. This picture you see here is an example of the kind of text that Palestinian children are being exposed to day in and day out, in school, after school. The picture gives children elaborate instructions on how to stab a Jew. We talk a lot about incitement here in the UN. You can see with this picture what incitement looks like. The picture is being taught in middle schools, in high schools, in elementary schools.
How to stab a Jew. Who's doing the inciting? Is there a right or wrong in this particular situation? Even apart from the biblical admonitions. Jerusalem Post has an editorial, I don't have time to go into it. Kerry's broken moral compass because he just doesn't know what he's talking about. And then finally we got the big guy in charge to respond to all the responses to the responses to the responses and everything, and he's going to clear it up.
And also in Israel, we heard Secretary Kerry say that one of the roots of what's going on there now is frustration over settlement activity. Do you feel like that is a root cause of the violence, and do you feel like President Abbas has a responsibility to condemn attacks and try to stop them?
We also believe that it's important for both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israeli elected officials and President Abbas and other people in positions of power to try to tamp down rhetoric that may feed violence or anger or misunderstanding, and try to get all people in Israel and in the West Bank to recognize that this kind of random violence isn't going to result in anything other than more hardship and more insecurity. I think my views are well known that over time, the only way that Israel is going to be truly secure, and the only way that the Palestinians are going to be able to meet the aspirations of their people, is if there are two states living side by side in peace and security.
Just to be completely clear,
Do you agree with Kerry on the role of settlements leading to violence? You heard what Kerry said.
I don't think that's what Secretary Kerry said. I think what Secretary Kerry said is that we have to end the violence, that Israel has a right to prevent.
Okay, mercy cut there. Justice Minister Shakid, she's from the Settler Home Party of Naftali Bennett and Jeremy Gimpel, who was here, said U.S. criticism is unacceptable and distorts reality. This is an article just this morning. Israeli Justice Minister Ayat Shakid, or Shaked, I don't know how you say that, strayed from diplomatic protocol Saturday night by attacking the U.S. administration on American soil. Shakid described recent American statements that were critical of Israel's handling of the recent outbreak of Palestinian violence as unacceptable. She said that any comparison between Israel and Palestinians, like the ones made by the administration, is a distortion of reality. She's a very powerful, fiery young lady who speaks with a wisdom and boldness beyond her years. So here's the report from the Jerusalem Post that France is going to try to get observers on the Temple Mount. That's really the core. This is a clip of a Gaza imam who's speaking the other week ago, talking about this. And what he says is, watch the attack on the right of the stabbing. And what this imam says in his speech, I won't play all of it, is, my brothers in the West Bank, my brothers in Gaza, stab, stab, stab. It's time to stab. And that's what they're doing. You see this man, you can see him replay it here. You can see him in the orange vest up there. This is a deception that they're using. He comes running up, he's walking up, and now he's going to stab this guy in the neck. And now he's going to go after other people that are there. And this is, I think this is in Jerusalem, I'm not certain. Certainly doesn't make any difference where it is. This is what's happening all over Israel. And they're using deceptions to do this. One deception that took place just yesterday, I believe, Friday, was this man in a yellow vest, which is given to the press of the Palestinians, and carrying a camera. He, you see this picture first, he's stabbed the soldier. You can see the man bleeding here, on the soldier bleeding on the right. He was shot dead. Okay, you see the pictures of them laying dead. You don't see the pictures of what they did, but you see him chasing, coming up to this man like he's going to take a picture, and then he pulls out a knife and he starts stabbing him. Here's a rabbi standing on the street in Jerusalem, and he's run over by a Palestinian who will then get out of his car, and you'll see what he does. Out of his car, he's got an axe or a butcher knife, and he's going after people. I believe the man hit by the car died. Now somebody comes up. Kind of dangerous to do this in Israel with everybody used to serve in the armed forces. A lot of people carry concealed weapons. But you see he's going to get up, and he keeps shooting him. And you'll see there's a little break here, but it's amazing how quickly that the police and see people come running to help. But you're going to see this guy, he's not done. And then the soldiers will come eventually. But the way this is presented in the U.S. and other press, I'll just give you a picture of I think the soldiers will come in here in a second. Yeah, here they come. They're really on the scene pretty quickly. But this is happening in Jerusalem. I mean, I can show you picture after picture, clip after clip of all this done. In the LA Times last Sunday, it said this, 6 Palestinian teens die amid Mideast unrest. Really? And that's how it was reported in a lot of different places. Here's Ron Dermer. Well, I'll play this clip. I think this is the last one I'll have time to play this morning, because there's a report on MSNBC about this. It starts with a clip of Netanyahu, and I think you'll get the gist of where this is going.
The current terror campaign in Israel is a result of continuous Palestinian incitement. First on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the outrageous claims that we are changing the status quo there or intend to destroy it. And now we have a new big lie. That new big lie is that Israel is executing Palestinians. Yesterday, President Mahmoud Abbas accused Israel of putting to death, execute an innocent Palestinian boy. First of all, he's not dead, he's alive. Secondly, he's not innocent. He tried to kill, murder, knife to death an innocent Israeli youngster, 13 years old, riding a bicycle.
I want to talk about a recent video that obviously it's gone viral effectively right now.
Now, what happened was MSNBC had a reporter at the Damascus Gate, and a guy comes by and he's shot essentially right on camera. And there's other views of it that have now emerged in the press, but the MSNBC reporter says, well, it didn't look like he had a knife to me or anything. I mean, I don't know why. He was just, it was at a checkpoint and he ran. But he's dressed in camouflage carrying a big knife. And who knows what he's going to do based on everything that's happened. So they shot him dead right there in front of the Damascus Gate. So they asked Rod Dermer about this, and here's what he said.
Has this entire sort of situation in Israel. Social media has become such a powerful force. The video on our screen right now,
Actually, I forgot. The first one they're going to do is the 13-year-old kid that they said is dead. Okay. Here's this picture of this kid. He was stabbed.
In the eyes of Palestinians, it shows a 13-year-old boy being left to die by Israeli forces. Israelis say this is a knife-wielding attacker who had just stabbed 2 Israelis and was bleeding on the ground while they wait for an ambulance. What happened here?
Well, it's not a he said, she said. I think the case that you're speaking about is something that the Prime Minister just spoke about, where you had two young boys, one 13 years old, one 15-year-old, and we have them on video actually, running around with knives. They took a 13-year-old Jewish boy and they stabbed him multiple times. And then that 15-year-old went to go attack a police officer on video, and you see the knife, and then he was shot. And the other 13-year-old also tried to do more attacks, and he was also injured, but he's not dead. We do not target any of these people. What is happening is you're having attacks in different areas throughout the country where people are taking knives, stabbing and killing people, and our police are taking the action required
on
in order
screen
to
right
put a
now
stop to that.
is two of the Palestinians that were caught on closed-circuit television carrying knives as they chased Israelis in the streets.
That doesn't look, I don't know in what language that's innocent, but those people are chasing people with knives, and you'll see if you run that tape a little bit longer, you'll see that they attacked this little boy who is leaving a small market. Here it is. They're running with knives. These are the people who President Abbas says are innocent and who Israel is executing. So the leader of the Palestinians is accusing Israel of executing an innocent boy. Look, that's that kid around that circle, right? He's getting on his bike. It's a 13-year-old. It could be your son. It could be my son. He's going outside right now, and you'll see on the top of your screen, people are running, and he gets stabbed. And then if you roll the video just another 10 seconds, you will see that 15-year-old boy crossing a street, holding a knife, and trying to attack a police officer. Now people are trying to help. As you see in the video, they're running outside. So these people are running loose with knives, and now what are you going to do to stop it? I hope you'll roll that for another few seconds because you'll actually see when the boy gets shot. Here it is. Yeah. Watch what happens. He's taking out a knife now. That's what's in that circle. And now he's running across the street, and he's shot. Now, what police officer would not do it in order to protect themselves?
So what do you do right now to combat this situation where social media has become such a powerful force for so many young people without the context, these videos that are being spread right now? What do you do to combat social media when a lot of these individuals aren't allied with any specific terror group? They're just young individuals who are seeking paradise, perhaps.
Right. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to make a clear demand. The international community has to make a clear demand from President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority that he has to fully stop all this incitement and all the lies. It's one thing when you're dealing with a problem of social media that individuals are spreading. It's another
thing.
You
need the leaders to step up.
The
and say,
leaders
hey,
have
listen.
to step up and stand firmly against terrorism. Abbas is not doing that. He's actually pouring more fuel on the flames. The other thing is we have to understand that this incitement problem has been going on for years.
Let me ask you what the State Department spokesperson John Kirby said, that the U.S. was, in his words, concerned about reports that could indicate the potential use of excessive force. Is this excessive force?
Absolutely not. I don't know what the State Department spokesman was talking about. You'd have to ask him. Israel
is there a middle ground beyond shooting these individuals?
Look, when somebody is coming at you with a knife, there is no middle ground. You have to actually take action in order to thwart that attack. Not everybody who's come at different people with knives have been killed, but there have been instances where a guy's taking a knife and he's going to kill somebody. Yeah. You know, they say guns kill people, knives kill people.
When
and that's why you have to take action
to Israel?
Stop. Well, we'll have to see. We know that he wants to do everything he can, and we appreciate very much the effort to do everything we can to de-escalate the tension. You know, last year we had a brief period where you had a bunch of attacks. You had people being run over.
Right.
There was a meeting between the King of Jordan, Secretary Kerry, and the Prime Minister. That led, I think, temporarily to a reduction. But what we really need to do if we want to solve this problem long term, we have to address the issue of incitement within Palestinian society. We have to look at what young Palestinian children are learning in their schools, what they're watching on television, and most important, we cannot have a Palestinian society that glorifies murderers, names public squares after killers. That has to stop, and the international community can help us getting the Palestinian leadership to stop.
Ambassador Dermer, always nice to see you.
Thank you.
Hey, and here's the 13-year-old boy who was supposedly lying there dead, that Abbas said he was dead, and he knew he was alive when they did the broadcast. There he is in the hospital. You can actually see a video of him being spoon-fed. They also went into Nablus to the tomb of Joseph, a Jewish holy site, and they set it on fire. They've done that in the past. Poor Joseph. Remember when Joseph died in Egypt? And they placed him, and it talks about the end of Genesis, and they placed him in a coffin in Egypt. And what was it, 400 years later? They carried his coffin all the way for 40 years, and they brought it, and they probably buried it here. I think there's pretty good proof that this is actually where Joseph is buried. And of course, he's supposedly revered. So let me just wrap this up. Give me 5 minutes. Survey says this: 2/3 of Israelis support withdrawal from East Jerusalem. The Atlantic, which is a left-leaning magazine, but they actually have a pretty good handle on things. The paranoid supremacist roots of the stabbing Intifada. I just would recommend that you go to the Atlantic website. It's a free article that you can read about what's going on. So let's just take a quick look. When Abraham, and I'll try to talk more about this in the future, when Abraham went to from Ur and was called out, he came up through what's now modern day Turkey, and then down in, because that's the best route, sort of along the Euphrates Valley, came down in, and you note that the most area that he sojourned in the Holy Land went from Hebron up to Shechem. He did actually go through Dan on one of his trips, but this area, what we would call the mountains of Israel, is very important. And there's prophecy about the mountains of Israel. I think this is a significant one. I think it's overlooked some. Excuse me, I'm going to have to sure what's going on here. There is a division of the land, of course, in this area down here. This is at the time of the division of the two kingdoms. The northern kingdom was here, the southern kingdom was here, but there are these regions: Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And I just want to focus on Edom because it talks about the people of Edom in 35 and 36 of Ezekiel. Also, thou son of man, prophesy to the mountains of Israel. The mountains of Israel is the biblical heartland, now known, or known in the time of Jesus as Judea and Samaria. Goes from Hebron up through that central spine. Now, in today's parlance, it's called the West Bank. It is the mountains of Israel. And there's a prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 35 and 36 that focuses on the mountains of Israel. And I think this is a very significant thing because I think we see this playing out right in front of our eyes, at least the beginning stages of what's going on. Prophesy and say, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God, because the enemy has said against you, aha, even the ancient high places are ours in our possession. So it talks about the mountains of Israel. In Ezekiel 35 leading up to this, it says, because thou hast said these two nations and these two countries shall be mine, and we will possess it, whereas the Lord was there. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, I will even do according to thine anger and according to thine envy, which thou hast used out of thy hatred against them, and I will make myself known among them when I have judged thee. What we see when we examine the history of these Arabs that call themselves Palestinians, they really tie their history to Edom. You look in Ezekiel chapter 36, it talks about Edom, Mount Seir, the region down around Petra, and Edom is Esau, is what the verse says. I think it's Genesis 36:8. So it talks about these people who are Edomites. And then there's these prophecy in 35 and 36. And remember, we talk a lot about 37, the dry bones, 38 and 39, the invasion of Gog and Magog in the latter days. But think of these as a piece, and that they may actually be somewhat chronological in their orientation. And so I personally believe that there's a prophecy about people who occupy the mountains of Israel in the end times that the Lord is talking about. Look what it says in verse 12 of Ezekiel 35. And thou shalt know that I am the Lord, and that I have heard all thy blasphemies which thou hast spoken against the mountains of Israel, saying, they are laid desolate, they are given to us to consume. Thus with your mouth you have boasted against me, and have multiplied your words against me, I have heard them. Thus saith the Lord God, when the whole earth rejoiceth, I will make thee desolate. There is this push for a two-state solution. Whether it comes about or not, I think we're at the cusp of something happening that's relevant to this prophecy about people who occupy the mountains of Israel. It says this, as thou didst rejoice at the inheritance of the house of Israel because it was desolate. It's actually proof that they won the lot when the Babylonians came to burn the temple. of Solomon. And now it says in the end times, it appears, that they will possess the mountains of Israel. Now, I want you to think back to 2005 when we forced Israel out of Gaza. How did the Palestinians react? Rejoicing, we've defeated them, we've beat them, it's now ours. If there is a two-state solution, what do you think the reaction will be? You think what you're seeing in Jerusalem right now will be the end of it? It will increase exponentially. It will not stop. And there are prophecies about this that go into this particular specific issue that I think are very relevant, but we know that there's a prophecy about it. I think, my speculation, my reasoning, I guess, is this. At some point, Israel will say, enough. Now, you heard very rational, calm people talking about a horrible situation with random stabbings and murders on the streets of their major cities and villages. At some point, this is the third Intifada. I don't think there's any doubt that we are in that Intifada. And at some point, Israel, I believe, will say, that's it. We're done. And there's some prophecies about those people. In Zephaniah, there's also the whole book of Obadiah, which is a prophecy against Edom. I think it's yet to be fulfilled. And it says Edom will be destroyed for violence against my people. And it will be as if they will be like stubble in the fire around Jerusalem. Now, when that unfolds exactly, I don't know. We can talk about that. But that is a specific prophecy of the end times. By the way, in Obadiah, where it talks about violence against my people, how do you say the word violence in Hebrew? Hamas. Coincidence? I don't think so. I'll try to talk. I have a long teaching on this, and obviously we're over time again today. So look, this is a very significant thing that we see going on in Israel right now. When you couple with it all the other stuff, the fact that we live in the days of Lot, the fact that Russia, for the first time in its history, has troops in the Middle East, that Persia is in Syria, and that there's an alliance between Russia and Persia. And then you have this going on. And I'm just saying these are signs of the end times, I believe. Now, exactly how quickly they play out, I have no idea. But I know that anybody that's watching will tell you there's an acceleration taking place. And if there was ever a time for the wise to understand, as I started this with from Daniel 12, now is the time for the wise to get in the book, to get familiar with the God of the book, his son Jesus Christ, the plan of salvation, and what the prophets have said about the end times, because I think we're watching them unfold. I don't think I have any doubt in my mind now. I've always kind of qualified it, but I really do think we're watching the signs of the end unfold in front of us. So let's pray. Father, as we say each week, Lord, thanks so much for demonstrating your love to us through your Son, Jesus Christ, and by giving us your word that contains detailed information about the things we should be watching for so that we can understand what's going on, and so that we can use these times as a tool to not only motivate us to live holy lives, but to share the gospel with those around us. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.